It was October 14th, 1986, a crisp autumn morning in a small rural town. 15 children from Crestwood Elementary boarded a bright yellow school bus for their annual nature field trip to Maple Hollow. Their teacher, Mrs. Hartley, waved at parents as the bus rolled out of the parking lot at 8:15 a.m. They never arrived at their destination. The town searched for weeks. Helicopters scanned the forests. Police dredged rivers. The driver, Mr. Cole, was never found, and no trace of the bus appeared. Rumors swirled, kidnappers, cults, even government experiments. The case grew cold. Families mourned, but no closure came. 39 years later, during a highway expansion project, construction crews unearthed a massive, rust-covered shape 8 feet underground. It was the missing school bus. Windows shattered, metal warped by time, but eerily intact. When investigators pried open the door, they found rows of small backpacks, some lunchboxes still sealed, and cryptic carvings inside the ceiling. "We are not alone here." No bodies were discovered, only scattered shoes. And on the driver's seat, a set of keys still in the ignition. The bus had no sign of an accident, no collision marks, no broken chassis. But its undercarriage was gouged as if dragged underground. Tire tracks nearby led nowhere, ending abruptly in open ground. The fuel tank was full. The headlight switch was on. Even stranger, the soil around the bus showed no sign of disturbance from 1986. It was compact, undisturbed for decades, as if the bus had simply appeared there years later. Families gathered at the excavation site. Some wept. Some screamed at officials to explain what happened. Investigators recovered a torn map with unfamiliar markings. And deep inside one backpack, a note written in a child's shaky hand. "If someone finds this, we went into the lights." The mystery remains unsolved. The morning of October 14th, 1986, began like any other autumn day in Crestwood, a quiet Midwestern town of only a few thousand people. The sun had just started climbing over the orange-tipped maples, and a cool mist clung to the streets. Parents bundled their children in warm jackets, fixed last-minute lunches, and snapped photos as 15 bright-eyed students boarded the yellow bus, waiting outside Crestwood Elementary. The bus driver, Mr. Leonard Cole, a well-liked man with 20 years of spotless service, greeted each child by name. "Morning, Emma. Good to see you, Ryan." He had that easy way about him, the kind parents trusted, the kind kids adored. Mrs. Hartley, the supervising teacher, stood near the curb, clipboard in hand, checking off names while reminding the children about safety rules. There was no sense of foreboding, no omen to warn anyone of what was to come. The children's laughter spilled out onto the pavement as parents waved goodbye. A few moms followed behind in cars to make sure the bus made it safely onto Route 9, as they always did for field trips. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the bus pulled away from the curb with a hiss of brakes and a puff of diesel smoke. The route to Maple Hollow Nature Reserve was simple, a straight, 40-minute drive down 2 rural roads and into the Forest Preserve parking lot. The weather was clear, the traffic was light. Nothing should have gone wrong. The last confirmed sighting came from Mr. Everett, a farmer working near a stretch of County Road 27. He waved as the bus passed, watching it disappear over a low hill. "Looked normal," he later told police. Kids were singing. Driver looked straight ahead. No speeding, no swerving, just a regular school bus on a regular day. But by 9 a.m., when the nature guide at Maple Hollow called the school to ask if they were delayed, worry set in. By 9:15, Mrs. Hartley, who had been following behind in her own car after a stop for gas, called the principal in a panic. She hadn't seen the bus at all. Somehow, in less than 45 minutes on a flat, open road, 15 children and their driver had vanished without a trace. Authorities were contacted immediately. Patrol cars traced the route again and again. No skid marks, no broken glass, no signs of a crash. The bus had simply ceased to exist somewhere between the school and the forest reserve. Parents rushed to the scene, some still in slippers and housecoats, begging officers for answers. Helicopters were deployed to sweep the nearby woods. Volunteers combed the ditches, the cornfields, even shallow streams, expecting at any moment to find a tipped-over bus, maybe trapped in a ravine. They found nothing. By noon, news trucks had arrived. The story flashed on television screens across the state. 15 Crestwood students missing, school bus disappears. Interviewed parents clutched photographs of their children, pleading into microphones. "Please, whoever has them, just bring them home," one father sobbed. Fear began to seep into every corner of the town. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered about a dangerous drifter seen weeks earlier. Others spoke of old legends about the woods, strange lights, strange sounds. But for investigators, none of that mattered. They were left with one haunting fact. A bus full of children had left the school, and less than an hour later, it had simply vanished into thin air. Within minutes of the missing bus report, Crestwood's single police cruiser was joined by state troopers. Officers drove the bus's route repeatedly, scanning every ditch, culvert, and field. What they expected to find was an accident, a vehicle in distress, maybe hidden from view. What they found was nothing. No broken guardrails, no skid marks, no gouged earth. It was as if the bus had never traveled that road. By mid-morning, the search widened. Deputies went door to door, questioning farmers and truckers who regularly traveled the route. None had seen anything unusual. No horns blaring, no smoke, no cries for help. Even the farm dogs, which bark at any disturbance, had stayed silent that morning. Helicopters were called in. From the air, the countryside looked serene, long stretches of cornfields and pastureland, stitched together by narrow blacktop roads. The pilots circled again and again, certain that a yellow school bus should be easy to spot against the autumn landscape. Still, nothing appeared. Dozens of volunteers poured in. Crestwood was a tight-knit town, and by noon nearly every able-bodied adult was searching. Men walked shoulder to shoulder through fields, probing with sticks. Women passed out sandwiches and coffee to search crews. The local church opened its doors for worried families, offering prayers as fear mounted. Rumors swelled with each passing hour. Some whispered about highway kidnappers. Others claimed to see strange flashes of light near the woods at dawn. Officials tried to quiet the panic, but with every fruitless mile, the community's dread grew heavier. Police checkpoints appeared on every road leading out of town. Officers inspected vehicles, opened trunks, and questioned drivers. Long lines formed as parents in tears begged to be let through so they could join the search themselves. The town was holding its breath, waiting for news, any news, good or bad. By late afternoon, the governor had authorized state investigators to assist. 9 units were deployed, sniffing along the roadways for any trace of the children. The dogs picked up nothing. Not a shoe, not a dropped backpack, not even the faintest scent trail. The trail was as cold as if the bus had never passed. When darkness fell, the search didn't stop. Floodlights lit intersections and wooded trails. Police radios crackled with dead ends and false leads. A farmer called to report seeing tire tracks in a field, but they belonged to his own tractor. Every clue dissolved under scrutiny, leaving only more questions. News crews camped outside the school, beaming live images of sobbing parents into every living room in the state. "Please help us find our babies," one mother cried on camera. Detectives worked without sleep, mapping the bus's route again and again. How could a 40-foot vehicle, packed with 15 children, vanish without a trace on open roads? By midnight, the once hopeful search had turned grim. Searchers stumbled through the dark fields with flashlights, expecting any moment to find the worst. Some believed they'd wake to headlines about a crash site. Others whispered fears too terrible to say aloud. The hunt was no longer just a rescue mission. It had become a desperate race against time, chasing something no one could see. As the second day of searching began, something intangible started spreading through Crestwood, fear thick enough to taste. The logical explanations were running out, and when reason goes silent, whispers grow louder. People needed answers, any answers, and so they began making their own. The first rumors were simple, almost comforting. It must have been hijackers, some said. Someone forced the bus off the road. The idea was horrifying, but at least human. Humans could be caught. But as police failed to turn up tire marks, ransom notes, or witnesses, darker ideas crept in. A few townsfolk recalled old stories about the Maple Hollow woods, strange lights hovering near the treetops, noises at night that weren't coyotes or owls. Kids used to dare each other to walk the trail after dark, telling tales about people who went missing decades ago. Those old legends, once laughed off, suddenly felt less like fiction. Parents became suspicious of everyone, even neighbors. A delivery driver passing through town was accused by a panicked father and had to be cleared by police. The owner of a roadside motel was questioned simply because his "no vacancy" sign was lit the night before. The desperation to find someone to blame made Crestwood a town divided against itself. As reporters swarmed in, headlines added fuel to the fire. "Bust to nowhere," read one paper. Another hinted at satanic cult activity, referencing other missing persons cases across the state. Parents started locking their doors in daylight. The once friendly community, where people left keys and ignitions, now lived in paranoid silence. Children who hadn't gone on the field trip refused to ride any school bus. Some swore they'd seen figures in the woods or glowing eyes at night. Police dismissed these as frightened imaginations, but the stories spread faster than facts. A meeting at the town hall turned chaotic when a resident accused the school of covering up something they knew. Shouts echoed in the rafters. The principal, pale and exhausted, could barely speak over the crowd's fury. The search effort, once united, was now fractured by anger and suspicion. Late one evening, a farmer claimed to see a beam of light crossing the fields where the bus disappeared. Investigators checked and found nothing. No scorched earth, no unusual marks. But word spread overnight. The kids were taken by something not from here. The FBI, brought in to calm the hysteria, dismissed these stories publicly, but privately, even seasoned agents admitted something about this case felt off. Files began filling with dead ends. No ransom calls, no escaped driver, no bodies. By the end of the week, Crestwood was a different town. Once warm neighbors now eyed each other with suspicion. Families stopped answering the phone, afraid of crank calls. And everywhere you went, in diners and barbershops, in church pews, people whispered the same chilling question. If this could happen here, where nothing ever happens, could it happen again? As the frantic search dragged on, the noise of helicopters and police radios slowly gave way to a heavier silence. The silence of parents realizing that answers might never come. Crestwood's houses, once filled with children's chatter, became tombs of waiting. Curtains stayed drawn. Porch lights burned all night. In living rooms across town, photographs of smiling children, school portraits, birthday snapshots, soccer team photos became shrines. Parents sat staring at them for hours, replaying the morning of October 14th in their minds. Did I hug her long enough? Did I tell him I loved him before he got on that bus? At night, some families kept their kids' beds perfectly made, as if expecting them to walk in at any moment. Others couldn't bear the sight, tearing down posters, hiding toys in closets, as though removing reminders would ease the ache. It didn't. The town organized vigils in the school gymnasium. Hundreds gathered, candles trembling in their hands, tears streaking down faces as the names of 15 children were read aloud. Parents stood in a circle, gripping one another, united in pain but unable to speak, because no words could explain the hole inside them. Some parents clung to hope with fierce desperation. They swore their children were alive somewhere, being held, waiting to be rescued. They called hotlines, hired private detectives, followed every rumor to the next county. Others quietly resigned to the worst, even as they kept smiling for the cameras, promising to stay strong. Marriages strained under the weight of unrelenting grief. Fathers buried themselves in work or whiskey. Mothers sat sleepless by the phone. Siblings tiptoed around the house, unsure whether to cry or stay silent. The missing children became ghosts haunting every kitchen, every dinner table, every holiday. Small details cut the deepest. A birthday passed with no candles to blow out. A Halloween costume hung unworn in the closet. Report cards arrived in the mail, with no one to open them. The routines of normal life, laundry, lunch packing, bedtime stories, became unbearable reminders that something irreplaceable was gone. Some families blamed themselves. One mother whispered to reporters, "I almost kept her home that day. She said she had a stomach ache." Another father slammed his fist against his car hood, shouting that he should have followed the bus. The guilt festered in silence, turning neighbors into strangers. The grief spread beyond the families. Teachers found themselves unable to finish lessons. The principal walked the empty hallways in the evenings, pausing by lockers that would never open again. A janitor refused to clean out the children's desks, saying, "They'll need them when they come back." By the end of the first month, the families no longer spoke much at all. They passed each other in stores and at church, exchanging hollow nods, each locked inside their private hell. There were no answers, no clues, just an endless waiting, and the crushing fear that this wound would never heal. Nearly 4 decades passed. The missing bus became more legend than memory, an unsolved riddle that older residents whispered about and younger ones treated like a ghost story. But in the spring of 2025, when a state construction crew began clearing land for a new highway bypass just outside Crestwood, the past clawed its way back to the surface. On an unremarkable morning, a bulldozer operator felt his machine shudder against something solid 8 feet underground. At first, he thought it was an old septic tank or a buried oil drum. But when the crew dug deeper and the blades scraped across yellow-painted metal, they stopped. The outline was too big, too rectangular, and unmistakably shaped like a vehicle. Word spread quickly. Police cordoned off the site, but by the time investigators arrived, curious locals were already gathering behind the tape. Some of them were old enough to remember the day the bus disappeared. Their faces turned pale as they realized what they were looking at. The excavators worked carefully, peeling back layers of packed soil that hadn't been disturbed in decades. By late afternoon, the roof of the vehicle was visible, rusted, pitted, but undeniably the Crestwood school bus that had vanished in 1986. A silence fell over the crowd as the last shovelful of dirt came off. When the bus door was finally pried open, the air that escaped was stale and heavy, like a tomb. Inside, investigators found rows of small backpacks, lunchboxes still sealed, and children's jackets slumped over seats, frozen in time, as though the passengers had simply stepped out and never returned. But something didn't add up. There were no bodies. Not a single trace of the 15 missing children or their driver. Only scattered shoes, a few broken crayons on the floor, and, most disturbingly, words scratched into the metal ceiling in a child's shaky hand. "We are not alone here." The bus showed no signs of a crash. No broken frame, no shattered windshield, no burn marks. Even stranger, the fuel tank was nearly full, and the ignition keys were still in place, turned halfway as if the driver had paused for only a moment. Soil experts examining the scene were baffled. The ground around the bus appeared undisturbed, compact and dense, as though it hadn't been dug up since long before 1986. It made no sense. If the bus had been buried at the time of the disappearance, there should have been evidence of excavation, fresh fill, disturbed roots. There was nothing. As night fell, portable floodlights illuminated the excavation pit. Investigators pulled out a torn paper map from one of the backpacks. It showed markings that didn't match any known roads or trails. In another bag, a folded note in a child's handwriting sent chills through everyone on site. "If someone finds this, we went into the lights." By the next morning, television crews from across the country had arrived. The discovery wasn't just news, it was a seismic shock. After 39 years of silence, the Crestwood bus was back, but it carried no answers. Only deeper questions, and the sense that whatever happened in 1986 was far stranger and far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The first investigators to step onto the uncovered bus described an eerie stillness, as if time itself had stopped in October 1986. Dust coated every surface, but there was no sign of rodents, insects, or weather damage. It was like the vehicle had been sealed away, untouched by the outside world. Children's belongings lay exactly where they would have been on any normal field trip morning. Backpacks slumped against seat legs, some unzipped, revealing math books and half-eaten candy bars. A few lunchboxes, still latched, contained sandwiches that had long since petrified into solid shapes. Everything was undisturbed, except for the ceiling. Investigators' flashlights illuminated words gouged into the metal above the seats. The handwriting varied, shaky, uneven lines, some large, some tiny. Over and over, they found phrases. "They're coming." "We are not alone." "Lights in the road." The scratches grew frantic toward the back of the bus, as if whoever wrote them had been in a panic. Near the rear wheel well, police found deep finger marks etched into the paint, as though small hands had clawed desperately at the frame. No tools, no knives, just raw fingernails scoring the metal. Experts couldn't explain the force required to leave such marks. The driver's area told its own unsettling story. The keys were in the ignition, turned to the accessory position. The headlight's switch had been flipped on. The driver's thermos, still half full of coffee turned to sludge, sat in its holder. Yet there was no sign of Leonard Cole himself, no wallet, no clothing, no trace of him ever leaving the seat. Investigators noted something odd about the windows. The glass was intact but cloudy, as if exposed to intense heat from the outside, yet no scorching or burn marks were found on the bus exterior. Samples were taken, but early reports called it chemical fogging, a phenomenon with no obvious source. In the third row, under a child's denim jacket, they discovered a torn sheet of notebook paper. Written in childish block letters were the words, "If we leave the bus, we can't come back." The writing abruptly stopped mid-sentence, as though the writer had been interrupted. One backpack held a strange map drawn in crayon. It showed the familiar road from Crestwood Elementary to Maple Hollow, but with new lines branching off into nothing, strange loops and circles marked with stars. No one could identify what the drawing represented. Forensic teams also found smudges of an unknown dark residue near the back door. At first glance, it looked like dried mud, but lab tests ruled out any known soil or organic material from the region. It was as if the bus had been touched by something that didn't belong to this earth. By the end of the first night of investigation, the bus had yielded dozens of clues but no answers. To those who stepped inside, it didn't feel like an old crime scene. It felt recent, alive, like the children had just been there, leaving messages no one was meant to see until now. And every mark, every scrap of evidence, seemed to point to one terrifying fact. They hadn't left on their own. From the moment the bus was unearthed, investigators realized the physical evidence didn't just raise questions, it defied logic. Every test, every measurement seemed to contradict the basic laws of time, decay, and physics. The first impossibility was the condition of the bus itself. After 39 years underground, it should have been crushed by soil pressure, its roof caved in, its frame twisted. But the body was remarkably intact, as though it had only been buried a few months earlier. Even the paint, though dulled by age, still showed the faint Crestwood Elementary logo. Soil experts confirmed something stranger. The earth surrounding the bus showed no sign of disturbance dating back at least 50 years. No loose fill, no air pockets, no broken root systems. To all appearances, the ground had been untouched for decades, meaning the bus couldn't have been buried in 1986. Yet there it was. The fuel tank was nearly full. Gasoline degrades in less than a decade, becoming sludgy and unusable. But when tested, the fuel inside the tank was fresh enough to run an engine, as though it had been pumped only weeks before the discovery. No one could explain how that was possible. The electrical system showed similar anomalies. The battery, though corroded at the terminals, still held a faint charge. Investigators found that if jumper cables were attached, the bus lights could flicker to life. It was as though the vehicle had been paused in time, waiting to be started again. Forensic teams used ground-penetrating radar to search for any tunnel, cavity, or evidence of machinery that could have lowered the bus underground. Nothing. The soil was densely compacted natural clay with no signs of excavation. It was as if the bus had simply materialized 8 feet beneath the surface. Microscopic tests on the cloudy bus windows revealed another impossibility. The glass showed molecular changes consistent with extreme heat, yet there were no burn marks, no melted seats, no scorched tires. Whatever altered the glass left the rest of the bus untouched. Investigators also found a faint electromagnetic field around the bus, detectable even when all power sources were disconnected. Sensitive instruments recorded fluctuations, like a pulse, as though the vehicle itself were emitting something or had been exposed to forces unknown. The personal items on board, crayons, lunchboxes, paper notes, should have been brittle and decayed after nearly 4 decades underground. But many were perfectly preserved, as if hidden from air and moisture. It looked less like the bus had aged and more like it had been stored. Every new finding only deepened the mystery. Reporters pressed officials for answers, but scientists and law enforcement alike admitted they had none. How could a school bus vanish in 1986, remain unseen for nearly 40 years, then be found in pristine condition buried in undisturbed soil? The facts didn't add up, because they belonged to no known reality. As news of the discovery spread, Crestwood became a magnet for cameras, journalists, and conspiracy theorists. Families of the missing children returned to the town square, demanding explanations. They had waited 39 years for answers, and now all they had were more mysteries. "Where are our children?" a mother cried at a press conference, clutching a faded photo of her son. Investigators stood behind a podium, reading carefully prepared statements. "We are following every lead. We have no evidence of foul play," they repeated, but the words felt hollow. How could a bus full of children and its driver vanish without a trace and then reappear buried in pristine condition? The absence of human remains haunted every conversation. If the bus had been involved in an accident, there should have been evidence: clothing fibers, skeletal remains, even trace DNA. But forensic sweeps came up empty. It was as though the passengers had simply stepped out of the bus and evaporated. The cryptic messages carved into the ceiling only deepened the dread. Who wrote them? Why were they so frantic? Experts examined the handwriting and determined that at least 4 different children were responsible. But what had they seen? What lights had they gone into, as the torn note suggested? Reporters grilled the sheriff and state investigators about the soil analysis. If the ground hadn't been disturbed since before the 1980s, how did the bus get underground? The officials had no answers. "We're consulting with geologists and structural engineers," they said, but behind closed doors, even scientists admitted they were baffled. The driver's fate became its own mystery. Leonard Cole's keys were still in the ignition, his thermos still sitting in its holder, yet there was no sign of his body or even his belongings. Investigators dug through his past for hidden motives, debts, or connections to crime, but found nothing. He was an ordinary man who vanished on an ordinary morning. The evidence collected, the preserved backpacks, the strange map drawn in crayon, the electromagnetic readings, all pointed in different directions, none leading to a clear conclusion. Was this a crime, a cover-up, or something unexplainable by human means? Public anger grew. Town hall meetings turned hostile. Parents shouted at officials, accusing them of lying or withholding information. "You're hiding something," one father yelled. The sheriff slammed his fist on the table. "We're as confused as you are." But that only made the crowd angrier. National media outlets turned the case into a circus. Some speculated about government involvement. Others suggested mass abduction by a cult. A few whispered about UFO sightings in the area during the 1980s. The families, trapped between false hope and media frenzy, begged people to stop treating their tragedy like entertainment. As the excavation site remained sealed, guarded day and night, one fact became clear. Every discovery only multiplied the questions. Where did the children go? Why had the bus returned now, decades later? And who, or what, had written the final chilling message? "We are not alone here." The return of the bus didn't bring peace. It tore open scars that had barely begun to heal. Parents who had aged under the weight of uncertainty were forced to relive every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer. The discovery was not closure, it was another wound. Linda Cooper, who who had lost her twin daughters that day in 1986, collapsed when she saw the photographs of the unearthed bus. "It's like they just left yesterday," she whispered, gripping the faded friendship bracelets her girls had made. "I waited 39 years to bury them, and now I still can't." Marriages that had survived on fragile hope began to crumble. Some parents blamed each other again, resurrecting old fights. Others drowned their pain in silence. Family members who had been too young to remember the tragedy suddenly found themselves carrying the grief of a generation. Children who had grown up hearing about their missing classmates felt survivor's guilt. They asked themselves impossible questions. Why wasn't I on that trip? What if it had been me? The return of the bus made the legend real and terrifying. The small town of Crestwood turned into a fortress of sorrow. Every diner conversation, every church gathering, every school hallway buzzed with dread. Memorial candles lined the sidewalks again, just like they had decades ago, but now the light felt colder, as though even hope was too frightened to come close. Counselors were brought in to help the families cope, but no therapy could explain the unexplainable. "You can't tell someone to move on when the past just drove back into town," one grief specialist admitted to the press. The emotional toll rippled outward. Teachers who had supervised the field trip were consumed with guilt, even after years of being told it wasn't their fault. A retired principal, now in his 80s, broke down on live television. "I promised those parents I'd keep their children safe. I failed them, and I don't even know how." Children of the missing, now grown adults, faced a strange and unbearable reality. Many had spent their lives imagining what their siblings would have looked like, sounded like, become. Now they wondered if they had been alive somewhere, somehow, for all these years. The federal investigation became not just about solving a mystery, but managing a crisis of grief. Town officials begged journalists to stay away, but Crestwood was now on every channel, every headline. "It feels like they're stealing our pain for ratings," one mother spat as she pushed past reporters. Even as the world watched, the families remained trapped in an endless nightmare, their questions multiplying, their grief sharpening, their hearts caught between hope and horror. And as the sun set over the excavation site each night, the town whispered the same, unanswerable question: what happened to our children? The excavation of the bus didn't end the nightmare, it deepened it. Investigators combed through the rusted frame, expecting to find remains or clues, but what they uncovered made no sense. There were no bodies, no bones, no evidence that 15 children had ever been inside when the bus went underground. Even stranger, personal items belonging to the missing children were scattered neatly on the seats, lunchboxes, notebooks, jackets, as if they'd been placed there intentionally. But not a single fingerprint remained. Time might explain some of that, but not all of it. Forensic teams discovered something else unsettling. The bus appeared to have been buried deliberately. The earth around it was compacted and clean, even layers, like someone had engineered the ground to hide it, not like an accidental landslide. But who would do that?
And why?
As news spread, rumors took root. Some whispered about a secret government experiment gone wrong. Others swore the bus had been part of an abduction plot that reached higher than anyone wanted to admit. And some, even more unsettling, wondered aloud if the children had vanished on their own. The lead investigator, Agent Marcus Hale, admitted to reporters that the evidence defied conventional explanation. Privately, he confided to colleagues that there were signs of recent disturbance, footprints in the soil nearby, too fresh to be decades old. Someone had been at the burial site before the bus was found. Late one night, the excavation crew heard what sounded like distant laughter echoing from the woods surrounding the site. Search teams swept the area, finding nothing but broken branches and the lingering smell of smoke, as if someone had been watching them from the trees. Then came the discovery that changed everything: a single Polaroid photograph wedged under the driver's seat. It showed 15 children, smiling, standing in front of the very same bus, but the photo was dated only 3 years ago. Experts examined the picture, but the film stock was authentic to the mid-80s, and the aging process of the paper didn't match the date. It was as if someone had taken the photo decades ago and somehow kept it pristine until now. Families demanded answers, But the investigation only raised more questions. Where had the children been for 39 years? Why had the bus been hidden? And why was there fresh evidence of someone or something moving around the site even now? As federal agents prepared to close off the area, Agent Hale looked at the empty bus one last time. "This isn't over," he muttered to a colleague. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the floodlights, a figure was watching, holding something small and metallic that caught the light. Before vanishing into the trees, the school district planned a memorial service, a symbolic closure for the families. On a rainy evening, parents, now decades older, gathered in the gymnasium where their children had once lined up for field trips. Photos of the 15 missing kids, forever frozen in time, lined the stage. Candles flickered in the dim light. As Agent Marcus Hale prepared to deliver his final report to the community, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. A child's voice, faint, trembling, but unmistakably young, whispered, "Mr. Hale, the bus isn't where you think it is. We're not supposed to be here." Before Hale could respond, the line went dead. The gym lights flickered. Several parents swore they heard laughter, the same kind they remembered from playground days long past, echoing faintly in the rafters. In the chaos, Hale rushed outside. Rain pelted the asphalt, but he froze when he saw the muddy tire tracks leading away from the school parking lot. Fresh tracks. Too small for any modern vehicle, but exactly the size of an old yellow school bus. He followed them to the edge of the forest and stopped. Parked in the shadows, barely visible, was the same rusted bus they had excavated just weeks ago. Its headlights flickered on by themselves. And in the driver's seat, a figure sat motionless, its face obscured. Hale took a step forward, heart pounding. The bus door creaked open slowly, invitingly. From deep inside, a chorus of children's voices sang an old field trip song, perfectly in sync, perfectly wrong. And just as suddenly, the bus engine roared to life, and the door slammed shut. It peeled away into the night, leaving behind nothing but the echo of laughter and a single object in the mud, Agent Hale's own childhood photo, one he didn't even remember being taken, standing with the 15 missing children.